And we're on. Okay.
So we're doing our central bank digital currencies evil. Yeah, do you want to kick us off with your thoughts on it?
Sure. I mean, I think that you can break it down a number of ways. I suppose that the premise for thinking that they're evil is that it involves the potential seizure of property and potential loss of confidentiality.
Yeah.
So those would be the two things that I could see as reasons why people might think it has the potential to be evil.
Yeah.
I think that one has to take a step back and say, to what extent do governments have that potential anyway? One of the reasons why society has been able to develop to the extent that it has, so that we don't, that most of us in the world today do not have to worry about starving to death. Okay, basically, in most parts of the world, abject poverty has been overcome, and that it's been overcome largely thanks to the complexity of modern society, and obviously the progress of successive innovations technologically, but also social organization. And social organization typically involves governments, and one becomes part of a social structure by essentially subordinating oneself to the government, to the society that is led by the government. And that subordination does involve reduction of reduction of liberty and reduction of confidentiality. And so I don't see central bank digital currencies as being a step that is qualitatively different from those reductions of liberty and confidentiality that are part of the social pact, where we accept the legitimacy of government, and we're as part of that acceptance, we give up our power over our own property to some extent, and our power over our own data to some extent. And those extents change through time. And I don't think that central bank digital currency, with its threat for reduced liberty and reduced control over data, is a qualitatively different step from that which is part of the social compact.
So the narrative that continues to circulate is, as much as the qualitatively you're saying things aren't different, there is at least this perceived sense of greater empowerment, where at least with a physical dollar, that physical dollar does not have the capacity to be seized in the moment. If someone gives me $100, I can choose to spend that $100 as I see fit. given that this $100 that's issued in central bank digital currency, now there's this at least perceived narrative um, that the government has the ability to just uh, immediately upon the click of a button shut you down, in the sense of their decision to I mean, the at least the narrative today that to shut down one's bank account, that would take, it would be somewhat more difficult. I don't know the exact procedure, but this, let's say, extension of the government's power to shut down one's purchasing power through central bank digital currency. You're saying that qualitatively there isn't any real shift in that power, but at least the narrative, and I've shared with you now, I think 2 articles. One was, well, one was a YouTube video by I can't remember her name now, but
Yeah, I remember
she's
her.
this YouTuber, and then there's this Forbes article by Mr. I guess Forbes himself. So the one who's like a business article pundit, another who's like, say, a thought influencer in the YouTube space, but equally these two aren't estranged thoughts. These are very prevailing thoughts when it comes to central. So the fear is very prevalent when it comes to a growth in the government's power. But if you could just unpack that a little bit more, when you say that qualitatively there isn't any shift in that power, and yet the perception as it currently is there will be let's not call shift, but at least a further empowerment of what the government can or cannot do when it comes
Right.
to controlling of an individual's funds.
Right. And I'm not debating the quantitative aspect. I'm debating the qualitative aspect at this point. So yes, I do see this. I see that as society becomes more complex, that there will be more subordination of the individual to the society. I think that we're heading in that direction. I think that we are heading towards the totally transparent society, and that if all information is totally transparent, then clearly power will gravitate to people or organizations that can assess that information and act on it. So that is a loss of liberty through the digital revolution, and I don't think we get around that. And I think that the digital currency is a part of that. So I'm not debating that. I'm saying that from a qualitative point of view, that we do give up as part of the social contract, as part of the deal for being in this highly complex society where you don't have to worry about starving to death, where basically you can find your own location within that society, and society says, okay, fine, it sort of goes along with it. I mean, the thing about central bank digital coin, okay, so you said if I have $100 in my pocket, I'm free to use it. So I think you're talking about that, say, 20% of transactions that are carried out not digitally, but are carried out with physical notes and coins. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So the central bank digital currency will not do away with that, right? So that implementing a central bank digital currency in none of the jurisdictions that I am aware of in the entire world will do away with those physical notes and coins that are now currently in developed societies about 1/5 of transactions, not by value, but by number of transactions. So those transactions at the discretion of the consumer will continue. Now you say, oh yeah,
Right.
they'll continue, but they're going to go down. And my answer to that is yes, and they're going down now. So if you went back a decade, you'd probably find that maybe 40% of transactions were done by cash, and now it's gone down to 20. So that trend, regardless of whether you implement a central bank digital currency, is continued. Now, obviously, that trend has gone faster in China than it has in the West, because in China, there's somewhere around 10% of transactions that are done by cash, right? Because of Alipay and WeChat Pay just taking off like a rocket. Okay,
Right.
that's not
Right.
central bank
Right.
digital currency. That's
No.
the digital revolution. So my
Yeah.
point is the digital revolution happens regardless of whether you implement central bank digital currencies.
Right. But
Okay.
there's a hard pivot
So if
between like
so, the question I'm asking you, the question to you is, are you talking about that cash, or are you talking about other forms of digital currency?
yeah, I'm not talking about. So the nuanced argument I was trying to make was just in regards to one's personal liberty in spending, not the lack of, because right now we're getting into the weeds about, well, yes, there's less physical cash being spent, and that's all well and good. I'm talking about the way that on Alipay, to my knowledge, as is the same with physical cash, just to say that the government has no capacity to in real time say, let's shut down this account, to shut down a person's bank account, to stop them from transacting, because I mean, at least partly the narrative that's being tested, I don't know to what extent in China, is that someone's social good or whatever their this sort of metric in determining the 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 civilians goodness. I don't know what's the term for that, when you have a credit score which isn't in debt or credit, but rather sort of injunctions, or I'm not even too clear on how the system works, but let's just go with, if this is a true system and then someone is deemed to be a bad actor, right, then to what extent can the government say, well, this is a bad actor, we will limit their capacity to transact in currency?
Right. So, for example, in China, right, if you have if your credit score, social credit score, is extremely low, then you can be prevented, for example, from taking a high-speed train.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now, people that are, for example, they have been, a court has determined that they should do a certain thing, pay a fine, turn up, present evidence, and they have not done so. They are in contempt of that court. Yeah. If you are in contempt of the court, it is likely that you will be prevented from taking a high-speed train or taking an airplane.
Right.
And so you're stuck with taking slow trains. Right. So this is I know people that are in that position. I'd rather not say their names over this medium because who knows where it's going to go. But
you know. Well, this is we're getting into the weeds of it now, though. But this is the fact of the matter.
No, you have talked about the social credit score, right? And it is functional in China. Now, the social credit score is functional whether or not one is dealing with a central bank digital currency, because the central bank digital currencies are not okay. And if the government has a judicial authorization to seize a bank account, the government can seize the bank account as long as the government knows the identity of the holder of the bank account. Now, in the United States, in Canada, at least for the last 25 years, know your customer has been one of the main tenets of deposit taking. So a bank cannot take a deposit unless the bank knows its customer. Now, I realize that rich people can get around this through shell corporations in the Cayman and in British Virgin Islands, and and in less savory jurisdictions. So one can circumvent some of these, but as society becomes increasingly transparent, the ability even of the very rich to circumvent will decrease. Now, that's regardless of whether one moves to a central bank digital currency that is already already baked into existing digital currencies. That is to say, deposit liabilities of banks. those are digital currencies, right? They're just not, they're just not token currencies, right?
Right.
But they have the existence in zeros and ones in computers.
Right. Right.
So what I'm saying is that that ability to seize assets or to restrict movement is available to governments as long as the identity of the assets of the asset holder is also available to the government. And that's true in Canada, and that's true in China.
Right.
Now,
So you're
right,
saying that social credit score.
one other point, which is
Yeah.
with respect to that 10% of transactions in China or the 20% in the United States, where you're dealing with physical cash. I'm not talking about the number, the amount of transactions. I'm talking about the number of transactions. With respect to that, then, you know, unless the government decides not to recognize the currency that it has printed,
Yeah.
then you're right that there's greater freedom, which is why those tend to go around with you know, briefcases full of cash.
Cash. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
but just a moment, I'm just going to take one more step back. But even but those physical tokens, those dollar bills that have been issued by the central bank. They are the liability of the central bank, and central banks have and certainly have the ability to cancel those obligations. So in history, at various times, various central banks have said this currency which we issued is worthless.
Right.
Okay. So that is very extreme theft. It isn't precision. The precision seizing of the assets is this person is in contempt of court. Therefore, we will take away their freedom or limit their freedom.
Right. Right. So to circle back to the question of further empowerment, because I'm just getting clear on what you mean by qualitatively versus quantitatively. So we agree that the quantitative, meaning the growth of that power, is only a product of the transparency that's equally in growth. So if we are in a growing transparent society, then the growth, or in this case, a diminishing of one's personal liberties, is a byproduct of that transparency. So that's the basic premise.
Exactly, of the transparency and of the social compact, right? Not only is it transparent, but we say the government is legitimate.
Well, okay, so the government being legitimate. So, I mean, as is used as the so the most recent example, using the truckers protest, for example, where people who showed up to this freedom rally, and let's say that it was a fraction of those who showed up to the protest were actually violent, but then anyone associated with that protest is deemed to be a bad actor, and so their accounts get shut down. And in this case, do we call that a legitimate act, a legitimate government, or do we say that that's an overstep of the government's power?
Obviously, that's in the eye of the beholder. So
Yeah.
if you view the court as being a legitimate exerciser of power, and if there is a court order to stop an activity, and if the activity is not stopped, then the people that are doing that activity can legitimately be restricted. And I believe that's what happened in the Canadian case, but I don't know.
Right.
So yes,
well,
it depends.
You believe, just for clarity's sake, say that again. You believe in the Canadian case?
Well, I don't know. You see, this is it. I haven't done the research on that, but I believe, but I think that it was done through a court order. That's how I think.
Right.
And the court order would be, there is a court order that says stop blocking roads in Ottawa. Okay.
Right.
And then the court order is violated by the,
Mhm.
not followed by the people who are blocking the roads in Ottawa. And so the
Right.
court then takes a punitive action.
Right.
Courts have been given that power in various jurisdictions around the world. That's part of our systems, right?
Right.
The separation of powers. And as
Right.
far as I know, every advanced country in the world, United States, UK, China, India. By advanced, I'm obviously I'm setting a rather lower barrier of advancement than people often can't. But they have this separation of powers, and the judicial authority, the power to carry out those laws, implement those laws, is in the hands of the judiciary. Well, enforce is in the hands of the judiciary. To carry it out is in the hands of the executive. To enforce is in the hands of the judiciary. And this enforcement is what you say is evil, I suppose, which is
Sure. Yeah.
you have an exercise of the right to demonstrate,
Right.
and that exercising of the right is challenged by a judicial order.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm
But
I'm
I say,
trying to use. Mhm.
I say I wouldn't want my capital shut down. The same way
Right.
I say I didn't particularly want the MTR shut down in 2019 in Hong Kong.
Right. I
I
mean,
didn't particularly want the bank branch firebombed in my building.
right.
It
No, I
wasn't.
mean, there's a desire for civilians to be able to go about their lives, and so in order to be for peace in order to be reinstated. That being said, there's the actions to make that happen, and then there's the punitive actions that might be an overstep. So I get what you're disseminating. What I'm questioning is when in regards directly to the to today's topic around central bank digital currencies, and I guess this would be the further demonstration of the quantitative act of
Right.
seizing assets. Um, like because we're not talking about the evils of an individual. We're talking about a legitimate government, and at what point is its part of empowering people to have the liberties, like, and to what extent is it I mean, the word that gets thrown around is being authoritative,
Authoritarian.
authorian, yeah.
Authoritarian.
And
Right.
it might be kind of thrown around maybe too freely, but I think that the feeling, the sentiment is a legitimate one. It's a
Right.
fear. It's a
Okay. So
legitimate
that in a different age, let's say the end of the 19th century, if there was a challenging of authority in mass demonstrations, often the reaction would be to charge the crowds with a cavalry charge and sabers and possibly guns. Okay, so that's a rather blunt instrument. Now,
right.
I think that the instrument of seizing or restricting use of currency issued by the government, whether it is through a bank account, indirectly then issued, or through a central bank digital currency, is a far sharper and more precise instrument. So
Right.
one can object to the increase in the precision
Yeah.
and say, let's go back to the days when cavalry would charge crowds. Or one can say, well, we gain something, we lose something. And I think that debate is legitimate.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't even make that juxtaposition about charging crowds in a physical form versus a monetary form. I would say the precision or the immediacy to which a lethal action is enacted upon, let's say, a vague crowd when there isn't a clear idea. I mean, there can be an idea of this individual being the bad actor, but then because of proximity that other people have to this one bad actor, then that what you call to be a very sharp object becomes somewhat vague in dispersion to try to make an example of anyone associated with other bad actors. And so people who get the reprimanded punishment might not actually be the so-called bad actors that they are deemed to be. And granted, at this level, it can all seem speculative. But as as previously, not clearly stated in our recording, in our discussion just now, where there are people you don't even want to mention because the act of bringing up someone's name
Might offend that person. Might offend that person.
Might offend that person, but equally, that's the splash zone of conversation, of just association, that now we have to become very clear with definitive boundaries between individuals, and that there's a very subtle fear mechanism at play here, where
right. You hold your tongue.
Well, you hold your tongue, but then like to what extent is it like? Is it completely this almost absurd notion of well, I don't want to like misspeak. There's one thing about like, well, I don't know all the facts, but another thing, like if I say this person's name, maybe I'll become associated with this person, and so I don't even want to be associated with this person. So that's also, I think, it's ridiculous.
It's not the association that I'm worried about in this particular case.
Right.
It's
in this case,
it is, I mean, the
right.
fact that I'm associated. Okay.
Right.
So,
right.
and anybody can look at the records. I just don't
Right.
want to offend.
Sure. Fair.
Right?
I mean, I get your context. I get your specific.
Right.
But
the person has.
But you get what I'm getting at here.
Right.
Right. But you get what I'm going at here.
You saw the Oscars, did you? You saw
the Oscars. No.
I didn't either, but I heard about it.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely ridiculous. But this is the with transparency, for whatever reason, we don't have the exact precise, because you were, just to go with your analogy of a sharp object. The sharp object is still somewhat, let's say, the use of it becomes not precise. It becomes simply a device used for a punitive measurement, but not used. Precise. It's not restriction. There isn't restriction on the use of it because there's a desire for punishment. Full stop.
Let's take a step back. Where we're trying to go is with whether or not central bank digital currencies are evil.
Right.
So my point is that they're not evil, that they are going to reduce various risks in the payment system and the banking system, and they're going to increase efficiency in finance. And they do potentially give greater power to governments. And that is something that every society will have to deal with. And what we're arguing right now is, and I apologize because I didn't do the research on it, is the exercise of government power in Ottawa a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So I believe that that's not really relevant to central bank digital currencies.
Well, what we're arguing is the exercising of power of legitimate governments.
Right.
And I put that very intentionally in quotation marks. Maybe not in regards to Canada, because I believe that is definitely, there's a greater sense of legitimacy. And now we're in a measuring stick of what's more legitimate, what's less legitimate, but the fact still remains. The exercising of power is the direct question, because people don't trust their governments on some level. And so if you don't trust your government on some level, to trust them, to empower them with greater cash, or not greater cash, to empower to like I have a friend that he's teaching a course on cryptocurrency. And his stance is he just won't use central bank digital currencies.
Okay.
So when it comes to this division in philosophy, let's say, when it comes to, well, if I have an option, I'll just choose the ones that aren't central bank digital currencies. And I think that's on some level sort of baked into the initial premise to Bitcoin, that some sense of sovereignty for the individual. Not being mandated, or even though I understand your stance and your philosophy that we live in, it's baked into the society that once we're born into society, we are taking on relinquishing of certain social privileges or senses of freedom. It's an interesting I think, division between people who go into crypto hoping to maintain that philosophy, and what you're bringing up, which is, and you said earlier, which is, given just the growth of transparency, it's just a natural byproduct that there will be this mass adoption of central bank digital currencies. And I'm not too sure
No, I said
what
given
might.
the increase, no, I said given the increase in transparency,
Yeah.
there will be a loss of liberty and a loss of control over data concerning oneself. And
Okay.
that I didn't say that central bank digital currencies will be implemented. That's not what I said. I
Okay.
said, though, that central bank digital currencies were could potentially be increasing loss of increasing in transparency and increasing the power of governments to exercise their authorities.
Right.
Okay,
So
so
I guess.
I'm not saying that increased transparency means that digital currencies will be implemented, that central bank digital
Right.
currencies will be implemented.
No, I get the leap in logic I made. I'm wondering whether you think there will be an adoption, because this is the question I equally have when it comes to our central bank. Because let's go with your premise. The central bank digital currencies, in and of themselves, are not evil because
Right.
they're just a further extension of the governments that you live into. So, given that we take on that premise, does that lead us to believe that there will be an adoption of central bank digital currencies?
Well, I think it's almost certain in China. And the
Okay.
reason why is because the most of the Chinese banking system is state-owned enterprises. Okay. So there will be little pushback on that. One of the things about central bank digital currencies is they take away banks' deposits, or at least a part of banks' deposits. And so that's, from a banking point of view, if you lose this cheap source of funds, well, that's not so good for you. So on the face of it, central bank digital currencies would not be terribly good for banks. Okay, so on the Chinese side, that there would be less opposition to it. Secondly, China is more digitally developed than most countries of the world. And it's becoming so at an increasing rate. And thirdly, there's a certain, what can I say, a antipathy among certain people in the government towards the fintechs. Okay, so I mean in China. So obviously Xi Jinping isn't terribly fond of Alibaba and Ma Yun and Ma Huateng. So he's not terribly fond of these guys. Why? Because they've challenged authority, and clearly they're advancing in ways that he's not terribly familiar with. I mean, he's very bright. I'm sure he is familiar with it, but I mean, it's not. He wasn't a programmer, right? That's not what he does. So I can see that his challenge to Jack Ma for being too big for his britches was legitimate. Okay, so to the extent that a central bank digital currency in China will reduce the power of Alipay, I can see that, all things being equal, he'd do it, right? You're replacing a complex instrument that goes through the banking system with a simple instrument. And you're going back to a principle that was certainly in the early years of communism, that there was the People's Bank of China, right? And it was the People's Bank, and you could have deposits in the People's Bank of China, although it wasn't particularly practical at that time because it wasn't digitalized. So I can see that there might be more pushes and less resistance towards central bank digital currencies. Also, they've done some tests of it. They've had several billions of dollars of central bank digital currencies, obviously in renminbi, but I mean dollar equivalents in test areas. So China is farther ahead of it than other countries. And central bank digital currencies have the potential in the Chinese context for retail globalization of the renminbi. Okay, so the renminbi is not a global currency, right?
Right.
It's a restricted currency. And yet having it as a global currency would be, quote, good for China, unquote, right? Because it increases the power, the financial power of China. So, but they don't want to do it. Why don't they want to do it? in principle, because they don't want to lose control of their own money supply. Okay, so if they go to central bank digital currencies, they could put an upper limit on the amount, on the spend, right, of individuals in non-Chinese jurisdictions, and or grade the spend limit on the central bank digital currency. They're not talking about getting rid of banks. They're not talking about getting rid of the printed renminbi. They're talking about implementing this digital currency that will essentially be convenient. And if it could help renminbi being spent around the world, but not lead to the potential for massive runs on the renminbi in the event of political, economic, whatever problems. So somebody runs your currency because they liked it yesterday, they don't like it today. So it's sold off in the foreign exchange markets. But if you can target that and restrict that activity, then one of the big impediments to the internationalization of the renminbi then disappears. So why do I think the Chinese will be the first to do it on a large scale basis? That's it. Also, there's less feeling yet in China that the government is bad than there is that feeling in Canada or the United States. There's far greater support for the government in China among Chinese than there is of the American government among Americans.
I mean, yeah, that's,
if you ask the average,
it's its own conversation. That's a whole other topic to disseminate, to like really make sense of. Yeah, given everything that they're up to, it's impressive to say the least. But it's also like, I mean, I'll just go with impressive for now. It's an exercise of power that is impressive. I'm right. So that being the case, that let's say that it gets adopted by China, like gets implemented, and there is, well, like you said, if there isn't a rejection of the government, then there's no reason to reject the central bank digital currency. And maybe that's the ripple effect. Maybe I mean, it'd be fascinating. I think that's just as a social study where like there's a narrative of our central bank digital currency is evil, and just by virtue of a country, of a major world power demonstrating its use, and then the narrative goes that it's not the worst thing, then does that have a further ripple effect that eases others into following suit?
right? I think that there is that possibility, because if a country implements it, and if there's no disaster from the implementation, then other countries may follow suit. Now, if you're in the American frame of mind, then baked into the American experiment, the American Revolution of 1776 and going forward, there is a deep distrust of government. So this is, if there is baked into, quote, the Chinese system, a deep trust of government from centuries of dynasties that were working kind of well, more often than working kind of badly. So you have a different basis in terms of trust. And that distrust in the American context obviously trades into the financial sphere as well. So the United States, although there was something called the first bank of the United States and the second bank of the United States, and these two banks, the first Bank of the United States and the second Bank of the United States, made it all the way up until the 1830s. Okay, so they made it right up until Andrew Jackson's presidency, and they were central banks in the same way that the Bank of England was. And then when the second Bank of the United States charter expired, because they were only chartered for a specific number of years, then the prevailing political sentiment in the United States was, we do not want a central bank. Why? Because central banks are evil. And that was the feeling in the United States. And so from that time until 1913, there was no central bank. And do you know why there came to be a central bank in 1913?
No.
John Pierpont Morgan. John Pierpont Morgan, of course, that's Morgan, the banker, right?
Right.
So there were more bank crises from 1830 to 1913 during that period than at any other period in American history. Because if the banks, commercial banks, are issuing the currency, you can see that might be a recipe for volatility. And that's what you had during that period. It's a period of free banking. So by free banking, I mean, banks were chartered obviously by the states that they were in, but their ability to engage in speculative activities and to have fraud and for that to impact onto the money supply and for that to impact then into the real economy was much greater than when you have a central bank. What happened in 1913 was there was this tremendous crisis and many banks were going bankrupt. Why? Because they couldn't get liquidity. People took out their savings, right? And the strongest bank in the United States stepped in. This is a private sector bank, because there were no public sector banks. It stepped in and it bailed out the banks. And that scared even the people on the, I'm not sure whether you call them left or right, probably right, I suppose. So they said, we can't have a private sector bank with this much influence. We need a central bank that'll help in times of crisis. So that's when the Federal Reserve System was implemented. And so it was implemented not because it was felt to be a good. The reaction of many people in the United States at that time was monopoly capitalism and the central government's control over or complicity within monopoly capitalism was a bad thing. But the central bank was seen as the lesser of several evils, because at least it was the government under the government's control. So I think that today we have in the United States, you have people like Rand Paul, right? He's on the right, and he would get rid of the central bank, and he would reimpose the gold standard. Clearly, these are steps back in terms of financial evolution. But he's a member of Congress, and he holds those beliefs, I believe, honestly. I don't like the man, but I think that he's holding those beliefs honestly. So there is this anti-central bank feeling in the United States, and it's the same as the anti-government feeling, and it's also part of this feeling that decentralized finance is a good thing.
Right.
And
I mean,
so
this is the philosophical
are evil by definition.
Right. Exactly. So this goes directly to the, and so basically to tackle the question, are central bank digital currencies evil? It really comes to the philosophical standpoint you want to side with. Are central banks evil or not? Is your government evil? Can you trust your government? And if you are of the mindset you can't trust your government, then you're going to go down the mindset that by and large they will become, or if it's baked, there is an evilness, there's a corruptness to their very foundation.
Right. I didn't expect to go down this road, but since we did go down this road, I think that it's interesting to look at this. Okay. Is my screen shared?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure whether you can see this, but you can see that they're okay. So these are countries of the world, and these are institutions. Now you might not be able to see this. This is armed forces. That's the light blue. Government. That's the orange. Universities. That's the gray. Civil service. That is the yellow. Justice systems. That's the dark blue. The police. That's the green. the press that is the darker blue, and then labor unions that is the brown. And you can see that this is the degree to which these the people in the country view these as trustworthy organizations. Okay, and as you can see, the numbers for China are remarkably high. Armed forces at 95%. Now, the United States also has high credibility, trustworthiness of the armed forces. And the United States is up at 80%. But everything else in the US looks pretty dismal, okay? There's labor unions down there at less than 30%, whereas in China, labor unions managed to get 65%. So it's an interesting table. And it goes back to that idea of legitimacy of organizations, legitimacy of government. There it is. Oh, I see. Sorry. Right. And I think that you can say, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we shouldn't trust government so much. And certainly is what many people in the United States would say with respect to China. Maybe they shouldn't trust the government so much.
Right.
It's a debate that one has to have, I think, with respect to one's own government,
Well, I mean, I think today, well, not today for the average consumer, but it'll be interesting at what junction in time this will be an average day question. Like right now, varying by country, the amount of people who are invested in some form of decentralized cryptocurrency in hopes of maintaining their not just their purchasing power, but their
liberty.
Their liberties, exactly. So to what extent there will be a crossroads where it will be, it'll be interesting, the laws that get passed as well as the growing user adoption over the course of time, where an individual chooses to say, well, I trust in this newly implemented central bank digital currency, and philosophically, I see my values as in line with the government, and I trust in this digital currency. It'll be interesting when that does come to pass, and what the ripples will be from that point forward.
Yeah, clearly, if you have a regulator of securities and commodities, and that regulator sees a security or commodity coming up that it's not regulating, then the tendency of that regulator will be to try to regulate that new security or commodity. And you can see that very much there was a November 2021 report to the President of the United States. They do these reports, and they're very good, really, because they do allow you to see what the thinking is of these regulators. And it is an unabashed call for complete regulation of stablecoin as deposits. They say this is a deposit. The issuers of stablecoins should be regulated as depository institutions. Right. If there are options on those deposits, as indeed there are, because that's some of the games that you've been playing with respect to those stable currencies as being the liquidity pool that can allow you to transact between various other digital assets, various crypto. So if there are options or other derivatives, those should be regulated by the organization that regulates the derivatives and commodities. And if these can be seen as securities, then they should be regulated by the SEC. And so that report of November 2021 was absolutely crystal clear that regulation should happen. So there is that thinking. In February, that report came out. And the reason why crypto traded up on it was because it was not crystal clear on what should be done. It was basically saying, well, this is new. What do you think? That was basically the conclusion of that. And so they've asked whatever it is, 20 or 30 questions. What do you think? So it's a request for people to comment on crypto. But I would be very surprised if the end result is not increased effective regulation of the crypto space.
Yeah, I mean, that is, I wouldn't even know where to begin, given how these things pop up like daisies, and like how do you regulate something like that?
Well, it's
Given
quite
also,
simple, right?
well, I get that it's all on the blockchain on one level, but then you equally have, this is a conversation for another time, but let's say the cliff notes are that there's a chain called Secret Chain, where or there's another chain. I mean, there's many chains that implement the same baked into the contract itself is such that you cannot follow the transactions. They've made it like they made the transactions this they mix it in with all these other transactions so that you cannot find it. This is the very selling USP, the selling point, unique selling proposition of the chain itself. So I get that it's very simple in premise, given well, you just follow the blockchain and you just have someone that or not someone, you have a large team, ever expanding team that manages the accounting of these transactions. And there's with every let's say management facility that works to oversee the legitimacy of things, there's an equal force to hide. You have
Right.
VPNs,
Okay.
you have all these. Yeah.
So, but let's follow that along. Now,
Okay.
Is that new crypto? Is that on a wallet?
So Secret Chain. I mean, it's its own chain that's.
Chain.
Yeah, it's its own chain. It's its own coin. I think it's own. I mean, I'd have to get into the exact semantics how it works. Is it on its own wallet? I'm sure that's a structure of it. But I mean, I couldn't say for certain. I can't say exactly how it works.
If you look at how Bitcoin operates,
right.
basically, 99% of the people don't participate as a node. Basically, they participate through wallets. Okay.
Right.
And so it's if you have a wallet, then it's very easy for a regulator to say these activities are regulated. If you're a wallet, you must follow these regulations. And if you don't, we'll shut you down.
Right.
So then it becomes a question, well, do I, as a consumer, wish to use as a currency something that the regulator has threatened will shut down? Or will I, as a wallet, as a platform, wish to entertain these activities? Or do I want to go completely into the illegal sphere? And generally speaking, what people do is they sort of fall into line.
Right.
The alternative, of course, is to put people into parliament that say, well, no, we really do want all transactions to be completely private, if that is the desire of the transactor. But that flies in the face of over 30, 40 years of know your customer regulation, where the whole idea is that we should find out, we being the society at large, where these guys are getting their money from, right? We don't want to have, Nazis or, drug dealers or people that are cheating the tax authorities. We don't want them to keep their ill-gotten and spend their ill-gotten gains. And so we give up transparency, we give up confidentiality in order to purchase the transparency that allows a fair society.
This is the nuance that
That's mom calling.
Okay,
I'll
well,
call her back.
what's the one for next week? The one for next week is it a Ponzi scheme? Is that right?
Yeah, the Celsius Ponzi.
Okay, I don't even know what Celsius is, so I have to look that up. But it's Celsius a Ponzi. Is there anything? I mean, I think that we sort of skated over the points on this fairly easily. I don't know anything about Celsius. It's possible that something will come up there that will lead to another one. But do you want to have a one after the Celsius is Celsius a Ponzi? Does anything come up here, or are we missing something from the previous ones that strike you as important to go into?
Well, I mean, the idea of there's a few ideas. The one that right now leaps to mind, in it's actually it's a branch off of securities, and it's twofold actually. One
You mentioned
is
smart contract at one point.
right. Let's not go there just yet, because that's a major offshoot. Yeah, smart contracts. Good lord. And I only say that because yeah, there's so many different kinds. And anyway, so the securities, the law, the questions, the speculation, and all that. There's XRP, which is big in that ecosphere. It's one of the
Right.
largest. Ripple XRP. It's worth looking into when it comes to just understanding how, at least for the time being, it's won its legal battle. I mean, that's the narrative as we currently stand. That it's not an injunction, but there's been a lot of restrictions placed on XRP because of the implication that it might be not properly listed as a security. Is that?
As a security, okay.
Yeah.
So the question is XRP a security? I mean, it strikes me that that's going to be sort of a legalese kind of, and I
That's
don't.
legalese, right? No, but I mean, so this is, I mean,
That's
so
going into
the
sort of
two
what I was
things.
saying a moment ago.
What's that?
I made a reference to the degree to which regulators would tend to expand their regulatory ambit. That's just baked into regulation.
Well, I mean, okay, so the goal here is to understand crypto more. Like, I think that's a kind of an overarching theme to our conversation, like to remove stigma, and to stigma not just for, but also against, in the sense of central bank digital currencies in today's conversation. The more the conversation can be one where these projections on, like, well, this is evil or this is illegitimate. I feel like earlier on we had a somewhat more nuanced conversation, because I think our very first conversation, Paula was listening to it, because you were talking about the seizure of Bitcoin and assets. The more we get into the weeds of, because when you saw me interacting with smart contracts using my MetaMask, there's a certain illustration over, like, well, what's being seized here. It's not, you don't need to be this validator that's doing these crazy power intensive, computational intensive things. Anyway, so if the goal of their conversation is to bring further clarity, then so their other coin is secret coin, because once again we're talking about the degree. So there's XRP and there's secret. These are two coins I think that are worth investigating further when it comes to, I guess, it's not the legalese of it, but it is the maybe the value. What is the value proposition of XRP? Like, what's the value proposition of secret network? Something like that.
Okay,
Because
you were talking a moment ago. Did you want to look at proof of work? Did you want to go into
that's
go into
Ethereum.
that?
I mean, that's, once again, we're getting into, so you have smart
Or-
contracts, you have
or-
proof of work, you have like all, like, it's not that I don't want to, but I think the thing that I
No,
find
no,
most
Ethereum
interesting,
is proof of stake, Owen.
no, it's moving to proof of work. Like it's proof of stake that's moving, that's Ethereum 2.0. And whether it meets its,
Whether it's going to be
Ethereum,
proof of
like
stake.
what's that?
Whether it's going to be proof of stake.
Well, I mean, so it's
Proof of work is
yes,
Bitcoin.
exactly, yeah, exactly. Whether it's gonna like make that transition, well, I mean, it's going to, but when it's going to, it's kind of, it's always been pushing back its deadline. But anyway. So in today's conversation, I feel like we kind of touched on the idea of the management of not the oversight, but the governing, what do you call it, the policies that are being, so without getting caught into the legalese, and I don't know how to formulate this in the question yet, other than just understanding what XRP is and what secret network is, because I think both of these present
Okay, well, we haven't actually looked at something different from Bitcoin, right?
right, yeah,
Why don't we make it simple? Why don't we say it,
Okay.
how is XRP, is
Different.
XRP the coin, or is it something else?
yeah, XRP is the coin.
Okay, so how is XRP
XRP
different from Bitcoin? How
Sure, that
is
can be simple.
secret coin different from Bitcoin? Or if you want to make it slightly controversial, is XRP really different from Bitcoin? Is secret coin
Right.
really different from Bitcoin? Does that
Right.
yeah,
Is
Yeah,
secret
okay.
coin different from Bitcoin? Is XRP different from Bitcoin? Yeah.
Okay.
And if so, how?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And so
And I
that's
think,
not
I
next
mean,
week.
the
Next
more
week
we
is
understand,
Celsius
is I think Celsius. Yeah.
okay. Celsius is not a coin, right?
Celsius is also a coin. This is the kind of the branches. Is it a Ponzi? If it's just issuing its coin willy-nilly, what makes it different from a Ponzi?
Okay, I see. So it is a coin. You can see I haven't looked into what this is. So is Celsius a Ponzi? Is XRP, how is, now, do you want, in that being the case, do you want to reverse the order?
No, I mean,
Okay.
it would have been like a smoother transition to go from yield farms, because essentially Celsius is more legitimate, as in there's a centralized entity with a completely transparent team that's issuing a coin. It's a legitimate yield farm. It's a clear, transparent yield farm, where most yield farms, and not most, let's say the major yield farms that maintain their value, they are similar to Celsius. It's just Celsius is one of the more what's the word for it? Community centered ones. Their USP is the way they, if you go to if you go to the Celsius website, you'll see like we are community driven, and I think a lot of yield farms don't position themselves that way.
So, but XRP is then a crypto. It is actually a self-contained, self-defined blockchain, right? It's right in the same way that Bitcoin is. Celsius, though, is not just the coin; it's also a whole quote ecosystem. Is that right? Let's find out that next week. Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay. So I'll see if I can figure out what Celsius is, and then you start on Celsius and tell me what it is. Okay. So the
Okay,
onus,
sounds good. I'll start
the
on
onus is
Celsius
on
and
you.
see what I find, and then you can ask me your questions, and then yeah, we'll do it. I guess it will be somewhat similar to the format of yield farms.
That's right.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, right, yeah.
All
So,
right. All right.
so
Love you, Dad.
love you too. I hope that you're doing productive things as well as this. Okay.